You might remember us, the ones in the red shirts.
We can't afford guns being the leading cause of death for children and teens in this country.
Whether you're Republicans or Democrats, you can't look away.
We're not going to shut up until we get the change we deserve.
Thoughts and prayers are no longer enough. We need to take action now.
You didn't get this far by saying you can't. You didn't get this far by just being mediocre. You moms demand action, and that's what we demand.
Welcome to Movement Builders, a show about the people ending gun violence in America. All of us.
I'm Kaylin Ford.
And I'm Nikita McDaniel. Happy New Year, Movement Builders. It's 2025. We hope that you had an amazing holiday with your loved ones and got some time to relax and unwind after so much incredible work last year. I loved having all three of our kids at home for some good food and great memories. Kaylin, what about you?
Yes, my boys, we really enjoyed spending time with our family in Newtown. We even got some snow. And, you know, Nikita, I'm sure you feel this way too, but they're back at school, back in their routine. And that means that we as moms get a little quiet time and we can get back to work.
Yes. And as you know, this is going to be the year that we have to fight harder than we ever have. And also, we will have to fight smarter than we ever have.
That's right, Nikita. We've got to build our grassroots power and really look at how we can best use our resources, including the time, talent, energy, and passion all of you bring to this work to keep building this movement and playing a strong defense and a strong offense where and when we need to.
Yes, it is all about strategy. And y'all know I love me some strategy. On this episode of the podcast, one of our original Moms Demand Action Movement Builders is going to take us deeper into that strategy. Lindsay Clarida, our Chief Advocacy Campaigns Officer here at Everytown, has been a part of this movement and moms since 2015. Lindsay, welcome to the show.
So happy to be here with both of you.
We're so excited to have you here with us. Thank you for making the time. First thing in the new year.
We know that you've been in this fight for a long time, my friend. Why don't you share with us what brought you to this movement?
So I originally joined Moms because I was really interested in working with such an amazing group of volunteers across the country. There are just not other grassroots movements that are really anything like that. Personally, I wanted to work on gun violence, mostly because I went so long without thinking of gun violence as a problem that had political solutions. I just thought of it as a problem that we dealt with.
Yes.
Including when I actually was out for a run, when I was living in Oakland and was almost shot. Someone was driving by and shooting down the street that I was running down. And I didn't really think of taking any kind of action. I thought, this is horrible. I can't, there was a guy across the street working underneath his car. I dove behind a building, but he couldn't really move anywhere. There were kids outside playing. It was a Sunday afternoon, but I didn't think of it in the larger context. And I think that's probably true for a lot of people who experience gun violence.
Yes.
They just think about it as maybe something that is hard to avoid, that there aren't necessarily so many solutions that we're not taking advantage of. And when I started to think of it and understand it as a political problem, there are solutions. If we build enough power, we can enact them and save lives. That really is what brought me to work with moms.
Wow, that's amazing. And you are exactly right. Sometimes we get used to it and we don't actually think about how it impacts us day to day. Thank you for sharing that. I don't know that I ever knew your personal story.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. And you're right. I think that, we've been sold this sort of myth that gun violence is inevitable, or there's nothing that can be done, or there's no one to be held responsible for it. And the more that I've done this work with all of you and had the privilege of doing this work with all of you, the more I realize that that's absolutely not the truth. And there's so many different policy solutions. There are people and companies to be held accountable for their role in this crisis. And there's a lot we can do when we work together, especially when we are really strategic in our fighting. I know you mentioned being out for a run. You're clocking a crazy number of miles. We've talked about this, you and I, at a couple different retreats, and I'm always blown away because I'm a 5K and under gal. But tell us how being a runner and a long distance runner in particular kind of gives you that perspective to be in this fight in the long haul and keeps you going in this work.
Yes, I don't know if I could do this without running. I did break my ankle 3 months ago now, and so I've had to slow down a little bit, do a little more walking. But overall, it's really helpful time for me to think, to process, to just slow down and take a break from what can be a hard issue to work on day in and day out. And it really brings a lot of mental health to my life and allows me to balance that and have the sustainability to keep doing this work.
Yes, and I also just share a quick little story. Like Lindsay showed me how she could speed walk when I first was hired back in 2016.
I love
and she
that.
made me believe in myself. Like, you could do this. Like, come on. So, like, you definitely, I don't know that I could ever be a runner like you, but I really admire how you use that as a place of really self-care and making a connection when we're doing this very challenging work that we do. We've been facing some challenges all throughout the career of gun violence work, and the challenges seem to be surmounted sometimes. But we do know that sometimes these challenges actually happen so we can slow down and rethink our strategy. So I know that that's part of what we're doing as a movement, especially since the results of the 2024 election. We know that we're not going to have the same allies in the White House as we have for the past 4 years. Can you tell us how you feel like this will change our movement to end gun violence from 2025 and beyond?
Yeah, I think we're all really in a reflective season right now and thinking about the last election. There's obviously a lot of anxiety, not just on our issue, but on so many that we care about. And I do think the thing that gives me some hope or perspective or motivation is that, you know, we may not have been exactly here before, but we have been in similarly challenging circumstances.
Yes.
And people have found a way. And I think we will also. And everything that we're sort of thinking about and planning for next year is not necessarily a direct reaction to the presidential election. There are things that we were thinking of already and that we knew we needed to prioritize. But I do think it's giving us an extra push to really dig in on some of the cultural change, some of the long-term change, and some of the harder areas geographically or issue-based on gun violence prevention. And so I think some of this is maybe things we would have been doing anyway, but that we'll need to really focus on that and move it up the priority list somewhat.
Absolutely. And we had the chance on the first season of Movement Builders to highlight some of the amazing work being done in the field by our volunteers. And we always say, no one can take that away. The incredible conversations that volunteers had over the phone, in person, over text, with voters, holding so many events and bringing, new folks along with us. No one can take that away. That happened. We did that. You all did that. We're incredibly grateful for that hard work. And as we look towards the future and build on that, we have so many opportunities to deepen what's been working, to rethink what hasn't worked or tweak it for the future going forward. And it gives us a lot of opportunities, I think, to do things in a new way and perhaps bring along new folks with us. And we all know that we refuse to give up. That's what we're known for. We have given America a reason to feel hopeful over the past more than a decade now. So knowing that the reality on the federal level is tough, Lindsay, it seems like shifting our focus to state legislative battles is going to be key in 2025. What do you see that looking like?
Definitely. I do think that's a big piece of it. As we have closed out our 10th year as Everytown, we're really taking a step back to think about how we want to approach our strategy for the next decade. What do we want to keep doing that we think it's particularly important? Are there things that we should reduce or do less of? And as you mentioned, one of the shifts that we're making is to really think about where we can make progress in the states. And so part of that is thinking about how to categorize different states based on our potential as a movement to make legislative progress. And I don't mean just legislation, but working with executive officials, working with lawmakers and decision makers at every level of government, federal, state, local, over the next year or two. And there are some states where we can absolutely do that or where we can put up a reasonable fight. And then there's some states where we as a movement need to build more power in order to actually successfully engage in legislative efforts. And so for the short term, we're really looking at how to refine our focus and really place bigger bets in places where there is the potential to do that, and focus our work in the places where we need to build on the types of work, which again are already part of our movement, but don't always get the priority focus of the movement, and do more of that kind of work in the places where we have to build more power.
Wow, that's powerful. And definitely building our power on the ground is so important, because it's going to take all of us doing this work to break through this issue. And we need to make sure that we bring everybody along with us. So while some of our chapters will be focusing on state legislative work, we also know that other chapters are going to be shifting to full-fledged power building mode. Can you tell us more about what this may look like?
Yeah, so I think this will open up some of our focus to do some of the things that help build relationships on the ground that, again, are already happening, but that often get sort of second place to a legislative fight. And we know that not every legislative fight is possible for us to make a difference, right? We want to think that there is. We always have hope. We will fight any fight. But at the end of the day, there are just some legislatures currently who we are not moving them. And so I think some of this will be different ways that we can move culture and institutions that still reach a lot of people and still have a lot of power to shift the landscape in a city, in a county, in a state around gun violence through some of our national campaigns. So some of that is more of our industry accountability work, which we've really been focused on over the last couple of years, getting more people to actually think of the industry's role in driving gun violence, not just the NRA as their sort of front man and lobbyist.
Yeah.
And then also in another lane, our secure storage work. And when we talk about our national campaign around secure storage, we really mean more than just how does an individual store their guns at home and maybe in their cars, but more thinking about an entire community. What does access to guns look like at the community level? Who are all the people and institutions that have the ability to reduce the flow of illegal guns from stolen cars? Where are all the places where you could intervene with families in the public health and medical community? And again, our volunteers have been leading in these kinds of efforts, but I think we have the potential next year to expand a lot of that work and really make some important and impactful change instead of maybe fighting some losing battles at the legislature.
I love that, Lindsay. And last season, we had Cincinnati City Council member Anna Albee, who's a former Moms Local Group lead, on as one of our podcast guests, who was doing some amazing work in her community, giving out gun locks at libraries, and just thinking all the ways that we can reach people with these messages at the places that they already gather. I love what you said about thinking about secure storage, not just as an individual choice, what one person does with a firearm in their home and their car, but thinking about it as a community decision and a collective decision. I think that's so exciting. And that's the kind of cultural change that really makes a huge impact, because unfortunately, not everybody is into politics, right? We hear that sometimes when we phone bank, where people
believe it or not,
people will say, I'm not really into politics. I don't really pay attention to politics. I don't really care who I vote for. I don't vote, right? But those kind of cultural and behavioral changes can happen regardless of what people's engagement in the political system looks like. And obviously, we hope that we make folks into gun sense voters, and that work is important. But there's so much that we can do in cultural behavioral change that really makes a difference. It sounds very exciting.
I really think it will be. And I think it also gives us a chance to focus on building some of the relationships to validators or to organizations that reach communities that we haven't been as effective as a movement and already reaching. And I think some of our work already in this area, specifically including our work with veterans, the Veterans Advisory Committee, but also other veterans in our movement and our chapters, and then also some of our young Black leaders who have been doing incredible work in communities that are very hard hit by gun violence and have reached brand new audiences and brought them in. I think giving us, again, that focus to really go into communities and think about where are all the people that we want to reach and how do we reach them. I think that'll be some exciting work that we do more of next year.
And so much of that power building, I think, is working with community partners, which, Nikita, you have really led the way on in so many ways. This question is sort of for both of you. Talk a little bit about the work that you see being done in this coming year and beyond with our community partners and how that fits into both the power building and the state legislative work.
I totally agree with that. I think this is also another area that's just really building on excellent work that chapters have done for years, building relationships with community partners and doing work with them on the ground. And I think hopefully some of this new focus just is a set of new resources that volunteers have to continue to build those relationships, to build some new relationships with community partners, because I think sometimes they have great access to a lot of people where this sort of new focus can be very helpful. And sometimes it's been harder, I think, to engage at the legislative level. I think that's gone well as well, but I think this actually just opens up a chance to build on the relationships, the community partnerships that already exist, and to expand that and create more.
Beautifully put. I can not add too much more to that than to say that just community organizing is all about building and strengthening relationships with the people and the people are a lot of people. They're not just individual people, they're organizations. And so coalition building and having relationships with community partners, as Lindsay said, is what we've always believed in, and deepening that work will only help us to build our power base. And that is what community organizing is all about. So I'm excited to continue to work with our leaders across the country and our community partners to continue to do the work on the ground in the neighborhoods with the community violence work, prevention and intervention work. And there is a very close relationship. I think that sometimes we've worked on, and I'm looking forward to 2025, us creating messaging that shows and connects that our community partners are just as concerned about our legislative issues as they are with anything else, because it's all interconnected.
Yes.
People want to help.
It is.
And the bigger the tent that we build, the more power that we have, which means reaching people where they are, speaking to people in ways that resonate with them. There's no kind of one size fits all for an issue this complex. And there's not always one way to talk about it or one way to reach people too. And so I'm excited about that work, Lindsay, as you mentioned, bringing folks from all across the political spectrum along with us, because there is so much more common ground than we think there is.
It takes all of us.
It takes all of us.
It does. It does.
Yes, giving me chills just speaking on it. One of the things that I have loved about this movement since I joined as a volunteer leader is I recognize that our movement has always been about adapting and changing to meet the moment so that we can make progress no matter what.
Yes.
So yet, some of us might be hearing this and thinking that it sounds like a lot of change from how we've done things in the past. Lindsay, what's your best advice for our movement builders who might be finding this in some ways challenging to make these shifts?
I think for any individual, group, or volunteer, it's not about doing all of these things. It's about thinking about your community, your area, and where it makes the most sense strategically for you to prioritize. Which communities or parts of communities do you want to reach out to? And at the national level, we're working to build more resources so that that is easier for people to do, so that we are providing more support.
And it's important to remember that the power building states are just as important as the state legislative states. We need both to win. We need both to change things.
Absolutely. So we're in the process right now of putting together a working group around our secure storage campaign and also another one on our industry accountability. And I think both of those, there are so many different intervention points, whether it's working with mayors or local city governments or, again, institutions, whether we had some great meetings with the VFW. And I think there's many opportunities for that to expand at the local level.
Amazing. Yeah.
But we know there are a set of questions that people are likely to ask. And so we have a lot of that information to put together and share to just make it easier for folks to go out and make the ask to specific individuals or smaller institutions in their area.
And, you know, talking a little bit about that idea of power building in the states, we see so much progress made in the long term by really focusing our efforts in those ways. What excites you about this strategy, and what are you looking forward to seeing as it kind of grows and evolves with us in this next decade of our work?
I think the thing that's exciting to me about this and really focusing on it more over the next year is that one of the principles I always think about with organizing is you're never just doing one thing. We will lead with the specific intervention or event or whatever it is that we're working on, but all of those relationships will then develop and build new ideas that we haven't even come up with yet. And that's where you really get to the stuff that I think works. People who are closest to the problem, you bring them in, you work with them, they come up with ideas, and then we can take those ideas and share them with others across the country. And I think that's where most of our best ideas and most effective work has come from in this movement. And eventually, again, we want to go back to the legislature. But how great would it be if we went back with voices from all across the community? You know, we always say this is not a partisan issue, but what if we had much better relationships across the aisle from unlikely allies that people said, okay, I really see what you're talking about here. This is clearly an issue that everyone cares about. So that I think is what's really exciting, is it's important for the discrete, explicit things we will do next year, but it's also important for the long term.
Wow. It just reminded me of my training this weekend I did in my community over the break with young folks, teaching them about advocacy and community organizing, which some people confuse to be the same things, and they are not. They are both absolutely necessary. And it sounds like we are really pulling up our sleeves and digging in on the community organizing piece, which we know, you said relationship building, bringing all of those pieces together, that is essential. You got to have lots of different activities that are strategic, working together and bringing the folks to the table that are most impacted is a part of that. So it sounds like we have a lot of organizing to do. We're going to organize like never before. And I feel like you've dropped a lot of jewels, but I wanted to ask you to drop one more, or at least a couple more in particular, whatever comes to mind. If there's anything that you would like to share with anyone about helping to keep yourself focused and ready to go.
Oh, that's a great question. I really think that it's all about balance. I think it's easy, especially when we have challenges like our incoming president, to think, I just need to dedicate all of my time every moment of the day. And sometimes people need to do that, and great. Like, we'll take it. That's helpful. But this is a long fight. You know, we always say this is a marathon, not a sprint. As a runner, I really, know what it means.
You've run a
to
lot
run
of
a
marathons. Yes, I was about to say.
You cannot sprint a marathon.
Yep. Not even Lindsay can.
And so never feel bad about what you're not doing. Feel good about what you are contributing. Make sure that it's sustainable. We need everyone for the long haul. And whatever you can do is making a difference.
So many different social justice advocates and folks are looking ahead to the next 4 years and thinking about how they can best do their work and how they can best make an impact. And I think that's such good advice for us on so many different levels, because progress is always possible, right? But we can't burn out. And we got to balance the anxiety and the anger and the frustration that we feel, which are all super valid, with taking care of ourselves and being able to keep going and knowing when to step back so others can step up, or knowing when to step back because we need just a moment or a week or a day or whatever the case may be. What do you do to sort of take care of yourself in this work? I know you talked about running, but how have you, especially with your broken ankle, maybe found new ways to take care of yourself in this work?
Well, I have to admit, I did not find a new physical activity. I am just excited to be able to start running again. I'm about 3 weeks in. So fortunately, I can just go back to what I know already works. But I am very excited about some of the upcoming runs this year. One of my favorite races is a 220-mile relay through Southern Oregon, through the wild and scenic part of the Rogue River.
I'm going to just stop her for a second. 220 miles? Did we hear that correctly?
It's actually 221 miles.
Okay,
yes.
all right.
But it's a relay. It's a relay, not a race.
About long-term change, this is a woman who knows about that. Okay, continue. I'm sorry. So where are we going on our 221-mile relay?
It starts in Applegate Valley in Southern Oregon, and you run over some mountains and go to the coast, and then run down the Oregon coast, which, if anyone has been there, one of the most beautiful places in America. So it's a 12-person relay. I'm not one of those crazy people. Believe it or not, some people run a lot more than I do. But that's happening in June, and I can't wait to spend 2 days in a van running.
Please take some footage of that experience.
I'll send you some photos.
Please send me some pics.
It's beautiful.
I mean, wow, that's amazing. I think I have learned a couple of books from you in the past that I've read that have helped to transform my thinking around gun violence prevention and intervention. Are there any books or podcasts or anything that you listen to help you get your mind and juices flowing and keeps you pumped up?
Probably my favorite podcast of all time is actually called This Podcast Will Kill You. It's two women, Erin and Erin, and every episode is about a specific disease. So the first part, they'll explain the sort of origin, when it was discovered, when humans started being impacted by it, if there was an outbreak, the human history of exposure. And then they go through the science, how it actually works, how all of the symptoms that happen actually occur. It's fascinating. And then the third part is about the current status. Is there a cure? Is it contained? You know, what's going on with modern research? And not good for hypochondriacs, not recommended for everyone. But if you like a little history and science mixed together, they're also just very fun. They have a great time with it. They love it. Highly recommended.
That sounds
This
fascinating.
podcast will kill you.
This podcast will kill you.
Not this
Erin
one
and
we're on
Erin.
right now. This
Not
podcast
this
will
one.
inspire you. That
And
podcast
not
will
that
kill
one
you.
either.
No, I actually think I'm going to add that to my list of podcasts for 2025. I definitely am a health person that's always trying to wonder, where did this come from?
Yes.
How is this continuing to get worse when we have this to make it better? So definitely want to make sure that we share that back out, and I want to listen to it as well. And just want to thank you, Lindsay, for being here today. You have a tall job, and for you to come in and spend time with us has meant everything. We also want to give you the opportunity to say anything that you would like to say, any remarks, or anything that you want to touch on, just speaking to all of our movement builders out there.
Sure. First, I actually really want to thank both of you for starting this podcast. I know we've talked maybe since I started in 2015, but we should start a podcast. And so you two really made it happen. I think it's been excellent
Thank
so
you.
far. I have loved listening. It's a great way to highlight so many of our leaders. And beyond that, I also want to share a huge amount of gratitude for every volunteer, every Moms Demand Action volunteer, every Students Demand Action volunteer. It is not an easy issue to work on. People spend so much of their time, and it saves lives. And I think sometimes we get really in the weeds of what we're doing and forget that is the larger picture, why we're all here. It's amazing, you know, being here for a decade to think about the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of families whose lives have been positively impacted. They don't know it. You'll never, meet. It's not that kind of change, but I think it'll be studied one day. It's really something. And so I really appreciate every moment that folks spend in this movement.
Yes,
And we appreciate you,
amazing.
Lindsay. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for the last decade of strategy and support. And there's so many good things coming our way. We have so many reasons to be hopeful. Any resolutions before we go? Any New Year's resolutions anybody wants to share?
To become a minimalist. I have too much stuff.
Yes.
So it's like, what are you doing with that? Like, why?
Yes.
So if I could just become more of a minimalist, well, I won't say a complete minimalist, but I can do a lot better. How about you, Lindsay?
I didn't make resolutions this year, but there's a very fun resource that I found out from Priya Parker, who does the Art of Gathering, called the Year Compass. And it's a little longer than I thought when I embarked on this. It's about 20 pages, but it's just this whole tool to help you reflect on your past year and plan for the one coming up. And it was great. I'm going to do it every year.
That sounds awesome.
I found out about it from Priya Parker, which if anyone hasn't read The Art of Gathering, it's like the book about events for an organizer.
How many
Podcast,
nuggets
I
from
think.
you?
There's
Yeah,
so
right?
There's so many good tips in that book of how to bring people together. I also need to declutter, Nikita, and with two little kids, that's sometimes challenging. But I've also decided my resolution this year is to just focus on the small things I can do in my own life that make my community better, or that are better for the environment, or that help people get excited about doing this kind of work, because we can always change our own behavior. And we can lead by example. And no matter who's in the White House, no matter who's in Congress, and no matter what anyone's saying on cable news, we can do those little things, and those little things add up. So I'm going to try to focus on the little things, and I'll keep you all posted. I want to hear about the decluttering and the minimalism. I want to hear about the Year Compass. We'll check back in here on the podcast on how everybody's resolutions are going too. But Thank you so much, Lindsay, for being with us. Thank you for sharing your story with us. And I've loved getting to dig in to what's ahead for us. It's leaving me feeling pretty excited and fired up.
Y'all, I love getting to dig into our strategy on this episode. And while there's a lot of change coming our way, I know from my time in this movement that one thing is constant, and that's all of us doing this work.
Yes, and we're so incredibly grateful to have each and every one of you here with us. All the work that you do in your communities really does matter. The work is tough. We know that, but we're tougher. And I know together we'll continue to change the course of history on this issue.
And we will use this season of the podcast to really dig into the work that we're doing on the ground, from fighting against extremism to building strong relationships with community partners. And as always, we will speak to the people doing the work on the ground, and that is all of you.
This is your podcast. This is our space. This is our community. Please keep sending us your thoughts, feedback, and stories to movementbuilders@everytown.org. We love hearing from you. Again, it's movementbuilders@everytown.org. And don't forget to share this podcast with your fellow volunteer leaders and team members. We love hearing your stories, so don't forget to shout out the amazing folks doing the work in your communities with us as well. And thanks for listening to Movement Builders. I'm Kaylin.
And I'm Nikita. Thank you for all that you do to save lives. It's working.